Hello again, folks. KR King here, helping you homebrew your own D&D campaign. So today I'm going to continue my series on rivers. Last week I talked about the types of rivers that you can put when creating your own homebrewed continent. Today I'm going to talk about the structures that go across bodies of water or gorges, or that restrict their movement. So you have bridges, obviously, but also dams and dikes and things that prevent that water from flowing. And, bridges and river crossings are an excellent source for storytelling ideas and encounters because they're a focal point of travel. If you don't have a boat or can't ford a river, swim across it or whatever, you must cross at the bridge. So I'm going to show you ideas on the type of structures, bridges, dams, whatever, that you should build across rivers so that it makes sense in your world, and then adapt it to the mechanics of storytelling and encounters. So the main factor in deciding the size and scope of a bridge is the body of water that it crosses. How big is that water and what is the surrounding terrain that it flows through? As I mentioned in my last video, epic rivers like the Amazon or the Mississippi were unbridgeable for vast expanses in the pre-industrial world that we associate with classical D&D. But I also mentioned the power of magic in the D&D universe, such that you can have bridges that cross what would be unbridgeable or fantastical terrain. So the scale of the bridges I'm going to talk about varies from the very small single crossing bridge to super huge mega bridges, which not only allow multi-lanes of travel and carts, but can actually have structures built upon them. And the same goes for dams. They can be very small, just for a small tributary or something, only a few animals, up to a huge dam that can control the flow of a huge river. So we're going to start small and simple, what I call the makeshift bridge. This is where a log or plank is just placed upon a river, usually a small stream or whatever. Now, if you have a larger stream, you may have a series of these logs set into rocks areas so that they can string those together, same with planks. And you have these occur in nature when a tree falls across a stream. And the thing that's interesting is animals use these sort of natural bridges all the time. There's a guy in Pennsylvania that has set up this remote camera and he just lets it run. And you see a host of different animals crossing this stream using this log bridge both day and night. What this establishes is animals don't necessarily like to get in the water either. Get wet, they can get cold. They will naturally be drawn to a crossing point. So, and here's the other thing. In D&D, you have the possibility for mega huge trees that could fall over a much larger river or a very deep gorge. Think about all the different versions of King Kong, that classic film, have this scene where the guys are on the giant log bridge across the gorge and King Kong comes along and he basically shakes them off to their doom. So the thing is, wherever there is a naturally forming or makeshift bridge crossing something like a river or a gorge, creatures will congregate there knowing that other things are going to use this thing to cross this point. In the 1933 version, they had giant spiders living at the bottom of this gorge that basically ate the guys that survived the fall. This was excised from the original film because it was considered too gruesome for audiences at the time. But think about things that could fly up out of the gorge to feast upon the players, or wait for them down at the bottom, or fly overhead and see these on this very isolated, vulnerable position to swoop in. And here I will mention the possibility, it's always there, that the players see a crossing point across a river or gorge or whatever and decide, no, we're going to use other means to cross the river, especially if they're aware of the dangers. Now, they can try to wade across or ford it with their horses, but again, if you're in full armor and you're trying to cross, this can be very dangerous. There's a video of a guy who tried to swim in a pool wearing plate mail, very difficult, nearly impossible, and he said that chain mail, when wet, becomes even heavier. So imagine trying that in a flowing river. Now, the other option is you can use ropes to cross a river, but if you don't have the right equipment and the proper training, this too can be very dangerous. And of course, in D&D, you have the usage of spells. The fly spell is obvious. You can get one person. The third level slot, you can use more to get two, probably go across most rivers, but are you going to have enough in that moment to fly an entire party? Misty Step is only self and it's 30 feet, probably not going to get you across. Dimension Door is a fourth level spell. And then, of course, teleport. If you've got that high of a spell, you're probably not worried about crossing some river. And there are other options, too, if you allow flying creatures to be character classes in your campaign. The druid, if they're high enough level, they can shape change into a flying creature. You've got the Twilight Domain Cleric that has a Step at Night feature, and so on and so forth. And the point here is that if you come to a river crossing, and even if the players do have the capability to avoid using this crossing point because they're afraid of something that might happen or being seen or whatever, they're going to have to use these abilities or these spell slots. And these could be very useful spells or abilities in the course, the rest of the day. So what happens is a crossing point in this way, if they choose, I don't want to cross it, the bridge or whatever, it's a very effective resource drain. All right, so moving on with our scale, what comes after the makeshift bridge is what I call the single file bridge. Think of the classic rope bridges over gorges that we've all seen in many adventure films, Indiana Jones, or the famous ending to The Man Who Would Be King, in which Sean Connery crosses this bridge as punishment. As he's in the middle of it, they cut all the ropes and he falls to his death. And the thing about these single file rope bridges is you're always going to be trepidatious. They're always crudely built. And the people that use them all the time have that sense of balance. But when you're not familiar with that, you can easily tip. And again, it's a focal point. Things see you. You're very vulnerable on these single file bridges. Now, the distances here on these single file rope bridges are usually close enough that you could use some of the capabilities that I mentioned before in terms of spells or whatever. But you could have some mega single file bridge, let's say a Grand Canyon type thing where you're connecting mesas or something. And what you're doing when you're creating, the super long single file rope bridges, you're not trying to screw the players. You're just creating another level of a puzzle to use their abilities, if they can, to avoid this or to just make the crossing. All right, so next we come to what I call the medium-sized bridge, which is one that can handle multiple rows of traffic and also carts. This is the classic stone bridge that we often see in miniatures, a single arch or a double arch that is the site of many classic encounters in D&D. Because these can have creatures on either end or beneath the arches and, of course, overhead. And access to these bridges in a civilized area is usually very controlled, so you have guardhouses on either end, people collecting tolls or just preventing people from crossing. And if you're going to avoid that bridge and cross on your own, you may want to do it out of sight of the guardsman or whatever that's running the toll bridge because they won't appreciate it. Now, there's also the abandoned medium bridge, and this can be really interesting because they're often in faraway places, deserted areas, and they have a story behind them. They're remnants of some empire or some powerful figure that's long crumbled or faded away. Or perhaps destroyed. And if you combine the abandoned bridge concept with the magic that may have gone into the only means that it had to be constructed, now you've got this powerful magic that may still resonate in the crumbling remnants or attract creatures to the site. The other thing about abandoned bridges is they're not maintained, so you could have areas that have crumbled away or are about to fall away. The players may be forced to cross. Someone may have put up makeshift planks or logs, but they may have to go some narrow, say just the edges of the bridges are there, the railing as it were, and that's what they have to use to cross. And the medium size is usually where you're going to have dams or dikes. These are used obviously to control flooding, to reclaim areas, to irrigate soil, or simply control the water supply. Now, the feature that you always have with a dam or levee or dike is the possibility that they should fail. This could be good or bad for the players. Think of the dam that Saruman used to fuel his war machine, and the Ents come along and blast it away. That's a good thing, right? But you could have the opposite situation where evil forces are scheming to destroy some dam and flood some valley, wiping out villages or even towns. And then they can pillage what's left behind. So you have natural dams, and these would be smaller like what beavers make in the wild, but these are difficult to cross. They're really not made for that. But it's D&D. You could have giant beavers making dams. There might be some possibility of crossing here. So I already mentioned the aspect of transportation that a medium or larger bridge provides, in which you can take carts across it. And also horses in a mounted group. You can try to ford a river with horses, but that can be tricky. And if you're going to use magical means, you leave them behind. And of course, the classic caravan situation means anytime you come to a river, you're going to have to use a bridge to get across. Which means also that if you have an opposing force, they know potentially where these bridges are, and they can wait there, knowing that the party is going to have to come to this point. And this relates to the concept I talked about with rivers, in which they are a natural transportation route, such that you can draw them on your map, giving the players an ability to go up and down to travel to different areas. Well, bridges serve as a gathering place for adventurers, NPCs, and monsters. The great thing, too, about medium-sized bridges is they're pretty easy to draw up, either with software that you use or even paper and pencil. They're not so expansive that it takes a great deal of time. They're a manageable encounter area for a battle. What I would recommend, even if you're going to want to run Theater of the Mind, draw the map out, even if it's crudely, so that when you're running that, you have a sense of the distances, how much room there is for the players and monsters or NPCs or whatever to maneuver. And in terms of story, remember that a medium or large or mega-sized bridge took treasure and manpower to construct and to maintain. And unless it's abandoned, someone controls that bridge. So when you're placing bridges on your map, think about the story of who built them and why, and who controls them now. Because knowing the story and who's in charge allows you to create a composition of forces when the players come to the bridge that makes sense. And the thing is, I would say that unless a bridge is cursed, haunted, or just totally ruined, it's going to attract creatures. Because its function, allowing a crossing of a river, as we saw on the video of the animals in Pennsylvania, draws things to it. And here's a further thing with medium, large, or mega bridges. They serve the same function that I mentioned in my video on outside the city walls, in which people will gather there knowing that people are going to come to this point, and they'll sell food, they'll sell drink, they'll sell merchandise, they'll provide other services that people might want. So just like in a walled city, you could have a shanty town that forms just off to some area right next to this crossing point. And the thing is, the presence of guards at a bridge, even if they hate the shantytown people and keep them at bay, they also provide some protection from the nastier things of the world. And the cool thing about crossing point settlements is you can create this sort of wide open town concept, right? Because you don't have agriculture or commerce per se, such that has a more civilizing effect. It's a one industry town. You're going to get a lot of grifters and con artists, people that will sell people anything. And this brings us to the final category, the largest bridge, which I call the mega bridge. And the classic example of this is the Old London Bridge from medieval times to the 18th century. It had businesses and houses on both sides of the bridge, even had a church. And it was a hotbed of activity and stretched almost 900 feet. And it was so crowded with carts and people, and the street was so narrow that it oftentimes took an hour to travel that 900 feet. So think about creating a mega bridge, on the epic river that flows through, say, your starting city, or perhaps in some wilderness area such that it is controlled by some powerful figure who allows the people that there's some safety and protection on this bridge. So you've got two sides to have buildings. These structures are going to be narrow unless your bridge is just absurdly wide, but they're going to be tall, 3 or 4 stories. So it's a controlled environment in terms of getting in and out, except that you could have entrances and exits on the floors because you've always got the river flowing underneath. Perfect for a quick getaway. And the thing about a mega bridge in the world of D&D is you can use magic to justify a very fanciful sort of thing. The picture that I used for my thumbnail in the last video showed this sort of impossible bridge. Think about other environments. There is the 7-mile bridge that connects the Florida Keys. You could have something like this, but much higher up, and then you'd have these areas that it goes where you have settlements and things along the bridge. And the thing about it is when it's covering many, many miles, the players are not going to necessarily have that option, unless they have teleport capabilities, to just magic spell their way past the bridge. They're going to have to travel the span and meet whatever you put there. Okay, there you have some types of bridges, how you might adapt them to the storylines and encounters of your world. What you want to do is take its functionality, which is crossing a river or gorge or damming up that river, and then applying the size and scope of that to game mechanics and whatnot to justify this and create an interesting environment for your players. And remember, it's a world of magic, so have fun with it. And if you like the content on my channel, please subscribe. Please leave some comments, and of course, keep playing D&D and tell somebody else about it.